Hi, my name is Johnny Gifford, and you're watching another episode of BCTV's Open Studio, here where we interview local nonprofits, organizations, individuals who want to tell us about what they're up to and what's going on in the community. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me a couple of folks from the Connecticut River Conservancy. We have the River Steward for Vermont, Kathy Urffer, and we have the River Steward for New Hampshire, Marilla Harris-Vincent. Thank you guys for coming in today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So we're here today because the Connecticut River Conservancy recently filed an appeal against the water quality certification for some of the hydropower facilities in Vermont and basically just along the Connecticut River in Vermont and New Hampshire. So I want to learn a little bit more about this. It feels like sort of a convoluted subject, and I would love to sort of get a sense of what does this mean and how is this important for the citizens of our area. So could you guys just briefly orient us on what are these hydropower facilities? How many of them are we talking about here? And what sort of impacts do they have for a river and the community?
Sure. So it's actually 5 facilities in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, and owned by 2 separate companies. And the facilities have been going through a relicensing process that started in 2013 altogether. And we're, so that was more than 10 years ago. So we've been working on this for a very long time. It's been a very involved federal kind of somewhat bureaucratic process. The companies had to do studies over the past years to look at impacts of the facilities. And the idea is that the license, once it's issued, will be a 30 to 50-year license. So it's kind of a significant, we have phrased it that this is literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to affect how the facilities are going to operate for the next potentially half century, right? So there's had to be a lot of different things in this process, and we're coming near to the end of the process. The companies submitted their final license applications to FERC in December of 2020. And then one of the next things, there was some settlement discussions with the company in Massachusetts that took a couple years. But for the past year, what has really been happening is the companies had to apply to the states for what's called a water quality certification. And so the water quality certification is meant to give the states the right and responsibility to protect their own water quality in the face of this federal action. So it's Section 401 of the Clean Water Act kind of sets up this structure that separates, state and federal government and provides an opportunity for the states to protect their own water quality. The states also have to develop water quality standards, which is basically how they would protect their water quality. And in this water quality certification process, it's larger view of water quality. So water quality can include things like your ability to swim in the river, or your ability to boat on the river, or the habitat that would affect the species living in the river. So it's not just like dissolved oxygen and nitrogen. Water quality is, there's a broader kind of definition under our water quality standards. So the companies applied in April of 2024 for their water quality certifications. First light in Massachusetts for the 2 facilities there. It's the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Facility and the Turners Falls Dam. And then in Vermont and New Hampshire, Great River Hydro applied for the Wilder Dam, the Bellows Falls Dam, and the Vernon Dam. And Brattleboro is in between the Vernon Dam and the Bellows Falls Dam. And the state has a year to basically draft, have a public process, draft a water quality certification that can have conditions in it that automatically become part of the federal license, and then issue a final license. And so by federal law, that has to be done within a year period. So when the companies applied in April of 2024, that meant by April of 2025, the states had to have this final water quality certification into FERC, to the federal government.
And I imagine that's when the Connecticut River Conservancy came in. Sort of, did you guys look at those standards that they put out, and then is that what you're really appealing against here?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been involved in this process the whole time, kind of every step of the way. So when it comes to the water quality certification, we actually, it's 10 years of information in the FERC record. So we actually proactively worked with the states to point out things that we were concerned about, that we felt like needed to be addressed. They then, in Vermont, they actually held some public hearings, which were also aired on BCTV. In New Hampshire, we held some public meetings to try to inform people about the process. The state did not do that. They issued a draft water quality certification, and then there was a period of time to comment on it. So we commented on the draft. We also educated community members.
And encouraged them to comment as well.
Yeah. And then hoped that, the issues, concerns, data, things that we were putting forward to the state would be considered, and that they would come out with a strong water quality certification. And ultimately, we were disappointed by what was really lacking, I think, in terms of conditions in both Vermont and New Hampshire. And in New Hampshire, the public process was kind of poorly managed, so they really did not provide appropriate opportunity, I'd say, for the public to engage.
Both the public to engage and also for DES to adequately review all of the comments and then adopt that into the final 401 certificate.
Is the DES Department of Environmental Services?
Yes, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, yeah. And then it's Department of the
Environmental
Conservation in Vermont.
Okay.
Yeah, so DES, DEC.
So in New Hampshire, your perception of these was that these meetings that were conducted, like, they weren't doing due diligence to really take public input and input from the Connecticut River Conservancy into account.
Yeah, especially when you compare it to how Vermont did. Like, Vermont did hold 3 public meetings in each of the facility areas. And like Kathy said, New Hampshire did not hold any. So kind of from the bat, there wasn't an opportunity for public engagement. And then they released the draft water quality certificate and gave the public 3 weeks to read all of that, compile comments. Whereas in Vermont, each facility got a month, and it was staggered. So it started with Wilder, then to Bellows, then to Vernon, and each had a month to respond.
Okay.
Whereas in New Hampshire, they just released all 3 certifications or draft certifications at the same time for you to review and then compile comments and have them in. And then because they have that 1-year period, they only gave themselves a week to review all of those comments, hopefully incorporate them, and respond to all of the comments.
And so
Which is just adequate, not an adequate amount of time. Yeah.
So did you see any of the public input sort of reflected in whatever they came up with after that? Or is it too hard to say?
I would say there was one aspect where it was, but generally, so they're but can respond to these comments, and usually that comes out at the same time that the final certificate does, and they took another 2 weeks to respond to the comments, which is one of the things that we're addressing in the appeal, that it's an ad hoc rationale and should not be incorporated in the license and any rationale and justifications that they make.
So you started alluding to this, but I want to know, bottom line, what is wrong with what the states have put out that you guys are appealing? What are the actual things that you guys feel are insufficient and that will, in turn, affect our communities?
There's maybe a slightly different list in each state,
Sure.
and this is where it's really the devil is in the details. So it's the specificity of the language that was or was not included, right? So an example is Vermont put in their conditions that the company would have to develop a recreation plan after the license was issued, which essentially means that there's no way for the state to enforce whatever might be in this recreation plan because there are no details in the condition about what really would need to be included. The company in their application put some specific things, like some specific improvements to their recreation facilities, and those are kind of codified in the condition, but it's, the idea of a full recreation plan that has stakeholder input, that is really considering equity across, on the Vermont side, there's 16 towns, right? Not all of those towns have access to the river to be able to swim or fish or boat. So really, one of the issues is this kind of after the fact requirement, which is essentially unenforceable, which is also lacking in details about exactly what facilities would be built, where they would be built, how they would be maintained, to what standard they would be built at. ADA accessible facilities would be great. So, the company put forward some things, and we're essentially saying that under the water quality standards, there needs to be a lot more detailed specificity definition about exactly what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, how much is invested in recreation, et cetera. So that's one example.
And it's similar thing in New Hampshire as well, with an after-the-fact recreation plan that currently does not have any details.
Another example is there was, there's endangered, federally listed and state listed endangered short-nosed sturgeon that just recently, actually, our colleague Kate did eDNA sampling over the past summer or 2 summers and has positively identified the presence of short-nosed sturgeon between the Bellows Falls Dam and the Vernon Dam, and between the Vernon Dam and the Turners Falls Dam.
I've heard about that. It's
right.
Really great news.
Yeah. So the federal government at this point, the short-nosed sturgeon is managed by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric
Administration.
Yeah. So it's their responsibility to take care of the short-nosed sturgeon on the federal level. And right now they're only managing them up to the Turners Falls Dam. So we know there's an endangered species in our area of the river. And, going back to the separation between the federal government and the state government, these are also state listed endangered species. So it is the state's responsibility, in our opinion, to protect the species, make sure there's appropriate habitat, and make sure that the actions of the dam, right, the way that they make the river flow, the rate at which it flows, how fish are passed through ladders to get upstream to spawn, to make sure that that is protective of the short-nosed sturgeon. And there's really no conditions at all that are protective of short-nosed sturgeon in the Vermont water quality certification. They are basically saying this is the federal government's responsibility, not ours, and our feeling is it is also the state's responsibility to protect those species, which is why we have state-listed species. So another consideration that we're concerned about that wasn't addressed in the conditions is climate change, right? Like the past 2 summers, we had catastrophic flooding in a variety of areas in Vermont and New Hampshire. Last summer, it was the upper Connecticut, like the Connecticut itself flooded. And so the hydro facilities manage how the water flows through the river. And there are things like that will happen as a result of climate change that need to be considered. So for instance, when that flooding came through, the Bellows Falls Dam, as a safety measure, they have gates that can be, sort of broken to move the water above the dam more quickly, right? So they're having to manage floodwaters. And once those gates came out, in order to put them back in, they had to lower the Bellows Falls impoundment to replace them, right? Which is understandable, except that when they lower the Bellows Falls impoundment, they have basically dewatered like all of the backwater areas. And so you have all kinds of fish that may be responding there, or juvenile fish that are being desiccated, and mussels, that are dying as a
habitat
result
destroyed.
of that. So there needs to be, consideration of a plan for how those things are handled, knowing that that is going to happen more often because of climate change. And there's also considerations of, being able to assess flow levels, how often it'll be flooding, how to respond, and things like that. So that's what it's really, the devil's in the details. Like,
For real.
Yeah.
The details are the most important part here. I mean,
Right.
to ensure, safe habitats for animals, to ensure, the ability for people to recreate in these and around these rivers. I mean, if there's no responsibility being taken by the feds or the state or whoever, I mean, how is anything going to be ensured that, people and animals are going to be safe in and around the river?
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense why you guys would be appealing this.
And I think it's also, the last time these facilities were relicensed, it was 1979, and so hindsight's 2020, right? So at our vantage point now, we can look back at what was required, or what wasn't required, right? Which maybe should have been required. And so it's, I think from our perspective, we're just really trying to be proactive and considering what are the next 40 years going to possibly look like, and what is the most proactive stance that the states can take to protect our resource in the face of climate change and like impacts to species and, all
And
kinds of different
communities
things.
surrounding on both sides of the river.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, it's not so much addressed in the water quality certification, but it's like, our towns along the river they're rural towns. There's a history of mills and industry that really isn't there anymore. And the river could be an asset. It could be an economic engine for these towns, but you have to be able to access it for that to, for that to happen.
And again, someone's got to take responsibility for it. And it seems like the Conservancy is looking for the state to take more responsibility than they have in the past. Because if it's not going to be the feds or the state trading back and forth, like who's going to do what, then there's a lot that you guys can do as river stewards of Vermont and New Hampshire to lobby, your state governments. So that's what you guys are doing right now.
Yeah.
And I'll say another big thing that we address in our comments is they are changing how they're operating these 3 facilities. So in this past license, they've been operating in a peaking model. So they're holding back water and then flushing it through at the most high peak energy times. And through a lot of negotiation with many different partners, they have agreed to more of an inflow equals outflow. So it's going to be a run of river is what it's called, with flex operation. So there's going to be designated number of hours every single month that they're able to operate in a peaking fashion. And otherwise it will be inflow equals outflow. And there weren't, in our opinion, enough studies done on how that's going to impact sediment flow, how that's going to impact habitat. So that's, and erosion is a really big issue, and how change in this operation model is going to impact all of these things.
Yeah, and it's like we agreed to that change. We are excited about the change. It's definitely going to be a better change. It's really moving the river back to a more natural flow, which is better for the species. But it can't be an experiment, right? When the studies were done, the studies looked at the impact of the status quo of the peaking operations. And then this negotiation and agreement came at the end of the study period after all the studies were done. And so while, from a common sense perspective, yes, it's definitely going to be better, there will also be, you're changing a system. So there could be unintended impacts to what that means, as Marilla said, about how sediment moves. And, phosphorus binds to sediment. We've had decades and decades of phosphorus and nitrogen loading on our farmland because that was the policy of USDA for years, right? The Farm Administration. And that phosphorus is still in there in the sediment, So if you suddenly start having sediment move, it very well could be that it's releasing phosphorus and causing water quality concerns. So, our desire is that the state require an assessment of that, like analysis of that, full like understanding of what that's going to mean for how sediment may move, and monitoring over the course of the next license to be able to respond to if there are going to be adverse impacts to that. It's like you can't just try it out and see what happens and hope for the best, right? And we sort of would like to have some things in place to like be able to track what's going on. Not to mention, just from an purely like academic viewpoint, this is a massive river. This is a major change. It's like a geologic scale change in the river. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge amount of knowledge that could come from the ability to do some comprehensive modeling and looking at, how this might change over time. And it would be a terrible missed opportunity to not provide the requirement for that to happen.
Yeah, and we want the river to revert to its natural state, but then like you allude to, we also have to deal with the consequences of just human involvement for hundreds of years now. So it's a really delicate balance, and I'm sure there's no perfect solution for it, and there will be some unintended consequences, but it's better than probably what would happen if you guys were not intervene at all. So I would really like to know why this is important for people in our communities to know, and what people can do to help, because you guys can't do it yourself. It's your job to sort of do this and to ensure the well-being of the river, but there are whole communities up and down the river that should understand how important this is. So why is it important, and how can people get involved?
Yeah, I'd say the river is kind of our lifeblood on this side of the state. So it's, as I said, it's an asset, and so protecting it is important. And it's also a 40-year license. So whatever is decided in this license does not get to be changed for 40 years. So that there's a little bit of urgency with that. We have had a lot of the towns have been engaged, Rockingham, Vernon, Hanover, Lyme, many of the towns have been involved and have participated and provided comments.
From the municipalities themselves?
Or the Conservation Commission, and also a lot of individuals.
Yeah.
And certainly a lot of individuals that live right on the river that have been losing land.
Quite a few farmers have lost good amounts of farmland. And it's also impacting roads with all the erosion. And so, it's taxpayer dollars that are, being used to repair roads in towns. And so people don't connect the two necessarily, that these peaking operations and erosion from how the dams are operating flows is causing these issues in towns.
Yeah, I'm sure that issue is not well known by the communities or well communicated.
Yeah,
I would imagine, right?
And I'm sort of just learning about it as well. I've talked with a lot of members, specifically up in Lyme, and the ones that I spoke with are really frustrated with how often, just driving on the roads is difficult, but also how many taxpayer dollars are going into repairing this every single year.
Just Band-Aid solutions.
Yeah.
And then, so how can people get involved at this point in the process, considering that you've already filed your appeal and you've had comments from municipalities, farmers, everyone? Where do we go now?
So there's two things. One is the appeal costs money, and we're a membership organization, so donations are greatly appreciated, and we really need membership support and donor support to do this work. So that's real. That's a real thing.
It always is.
Yeah. The other way to get involved, the next sort of piece of the puzzle, as it were, is because it's a federal action, it requires an environmental impact statement. And so the FERC just released the draft environmental impact statement, which really is supposed to look at the environmental impacts of all of the facilities, these three facilities together. And so it's a big document. There's a comment period, and there's going to be public hearings in Rockingham or Bellows Falls on July, help me,
17th.
And then the comment period is open until July 29th. So people can get involved by actually reading the environmental impact statement and providing comment on that as well.
And that's on the federal side, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of threads to keep track of.
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
for sure.
Many different processes going on
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's still some time for people to share their voice through the federal part of the process.
Yep.
For people to contribute and support the Connecticut River Conservancy, so you guys can keep doing this work. And then how can people stay informed about sort of the status of all this work, considering, we're looking at like 13 years of work or so here. And I imagine things are coming somewhat to a head, or at least so we hope. So how can people like stay in touch about what the progress is on all of this?
We have e-newsletters through our website, and you can choose specific. We have many different ones, and so we have a hydro newsletter that goes out when big things happen, and that's kind of the main way that if you're interested specifically in hydro and this whole relicensing process, that's a really great way to stay informed and up to date on what we're doing, where the process is. And so that would be a main way. We also each have our own newsletters that are state specific. So we include hydro updates and other things that we're doing in the state in those state specific newsletters.
That's great. Is there anything else that either of you want to add about this process that you feel like we didn't get to necessarily cover?
Yeah, I realizing though we would be remiss if we didn't mention our partners in the appeal. So in Vermont, the appeal is with us and the Conservation Law Foundation and the Vermont Natural Resources Council and American Whitewater. So all of us are appealing together. And then in New Hampshire, it's
American Rivers and American Whitewater.
Right. And then in the Massachusetts appeal, it's American Rivers and CRC.
Are these nonprofit organizations?
Yeah. In some cases, like American Whitewater is a national organization that supports whitewater boaters and access to whitewater boating all over the country. American Rivers is a similar kind of like national focused river organization that's focused on river health. And then in the States, the Conservation Law Foundation does a lot of environmental focused advocacy work, and actually in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, but there are co-plaintiff only in Vermont in this case. And then similar, Vermont Natural Resources Council does a lot of environmental work, education, restoration work, and policy work in Vermont. So they're great partners to have.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I'm sure you guys can't do it alone at all. And the fact that you have national organizations and local organizations backing you guys up on this is, I'm sure, really, really helpful to have that network.
And it's great too, because they are national organizations, all of their members are also being clued in to what's happening. So I think it's getting CRC's mission out and the impacts of the Connecticut River to more than just people in the watershed.
That's great. Well, I think your I almost said your river. Your website.
It's your river.
It's our river.
Yeah.
Your website is ctriver.org, is that right?
Right.
And I know that's a resource where people can stay up to date on sort of what's going on and sign up for the newsletters and everything. Well, Kathy and Marilla, it's been really great having you in the studio today and learning more about this. I get your newsletter about it all, and I kind of glaze over it a little bit about this issue specifically. I'm like, what does this mean? It's important, but what does it mean? So I feel like you definitely cleared up a lot for me at least.
Oh, great.
And hopefully to other folks. Thank you guys again for coming in today and letting us know about this really important water quality certification. That 13 years of work, my God. But just thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks
for
for having
the
us.
opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you for watching another episode of BCTV's Open Studio. We're pleased to have the Connecticut River Conservancy in here this afternoon. You can learn more about what they're up to at ctriver.org, especially as it relates to all of this really important water quality certifications throughout the river, all the way from the top to the bottom. So definitely look into that if you care, and you should care. I'm going to stop talking now. Take care.